All right, this is like take seven of a regular season prediction video for the Green Bay Packers, and it's going to be a rough one. I apologize, but here we go. So, to begin, the Green Bay Packers, to summarize free agency, the Green Bay Packers signed Josh Jacobs, running back, and safety Xavier McKinney in free agency to make up for the loss of running back Aaron Jones, who the Packers decided to let walk. They also released David Bakhtiari, left tackle, and the Packers I don't think they retained any safeties in free agency as well. All the safeties who were going to be free agents, they were gone. So the Packers signed Xavier McKinney. They also drafted Javon Bullard out of Georgia to fill the safety position, and then they signed Josh Jacobs to take over for Aaron Jones. Now that we're caught up on free agency, let's dive into the Green Bay Packers 2024 regular season. Here are my predictions. Here's how I think the regular season is going to go. Coming up, or not coming up, coming up in 3 days is the first game of the regular season. Green Bay Packers will travel to Sao Paulo, Brazil, to take on the Philadelphia Eagles on Friday night. I believe this is the first NFL game hosted in Brazil. Should be pretty interesting. There have been some warnings about do's and don'ts, so I'm sure people have heard of that already. So um, I hope for everyone's safety. I hope everything can go according to plan and um, that NFL game can be played and that there's no violence or anything like that. But, I'm getting too off track here. So hope everything goes well and I hope the game can be played and it can be done with. So enough of my rambling. I'm finally getting into it here. This is a game I think the Packers can win. This is kind of one of those toss-up games. There's going to be a few of those on here on the schedule. It's a game I think the Packers can win, and I think it's hard for me to say. It's 50-50. Philadelphia did lose Jason Kelsey, and they also lost Fletcher Cox. So they lost their center and one of their defensive tackles. So it'll be interesting to see what Philadelphia does with their offensive and defensive line. Um, but every team has moves throughout the year. I'm gonna I'm gonna play it safe. I'm gonna think the Packers lose this game. However, I think it's gonna be really close, and I think it can go either way. I'm hoping for a win, but we'll see what happens. The next game the Packers play in week two will be at home, the home opener on September 15th against the Indianapolis Colts. That is a game I think they win. Indianapolis should be competitive, especially if Anthony Richardson continues the trajectory we saw last year before he got injured. If he can come back without any complications, it should be a fun one. But I think the Packers win that game. In week three, the Packers will travel to Tennessee to take on the Tennessee Titans. That is another game I think the Packers will win, um, simply just based off of the talent discrepancy between the two. The Green Bay Packers are in a contending mode, and I think Tennessee is in a rebuild. In week four, the Green Bay Packers come back to Green Bay to take on the rival Minnesota Vikings. Again, I think that is a game the Green Bay Packers win, simply based off of the fact that Minnesota lost some talent this year, and I think Green Bay is as either the same or they've improved since where they were at the end of last season. So, off to a great start in September. I think the Packers go 3-1 to start the year. First game in October, October 6th, the Green Bay Packers will travel to Los Angeles to take on the Rams in LA. That one should be another competitive game. It's a game I think could go either way. I am going to say the Packers win that game, though. Just over the past few years, the Packers have seemed to have the Rams number. So I'm going to say the Packers win that one. And then the next week, the Packers will be back in Green Bay to take on the Arizona Cardinals. Again, there's just too much talent discrepancy. Arizona's rebuilding, Green Bay's contending. I think Green Bay wins that game as well. In week seven, a game that is slated for noon right now, but I think can easily be flexed. The Green Bay Packers will take on the Houston Texans in Green Bay on October 20th. That game, another one. Two young quarterbacks, two young stars, Jordan Love, CJ Stroud, immense talent at the wide receiver position for both teams, both up and coming teams, and it could honestly be a Super Bowl preview. If it's not this year, it could be next year. That one should be really fun. I am going to pick the Packers to lose this game because I can't pick the Packers to win every game. It could go either way. It should be a lot of fun. I'm going to say Houston gets the win in a close game in that one. Excuse me. The final game in October, on October 27th, the Green Bay Packers will travel to Jacksonville to take on Trevor Lawrence and the Jaguars. Being in Jacksonville in October, the weather slash heat might be a factor. Again, that's a game I think could go either way. I am going to give Green Bay the edge just a little bit. It should be a really fun one, and I would not be surprised if Jacksonville wins that game. But I am going to pick the Packers to win this one. First game in November, the Green Bay Packers on November 3rd, the Green Bay Packers will be back in Green Bay to take on the Detroit Lions. Last year, the Packers and Lions split. They went 1-1. The Lions won in Green Bay. Green Bay won in Detroit. Um, this one being at home, I think Green Bay is going to take this one. The Green Bay Packers will beat the Lions at home this year. In week 10, the Packers have a bye week. And then on November 17th, the Green Bay Packers will travel to Chicago to take on the Bears for the first time this season. And I think that one is a game that the Green Bay Packers will win unless Caleb Williams is the next generational talent and he's the next Mahomes. But rookie quarterback, I don't think Chicago is going to do that great off the bat. They have a lot of talent on the offensive side of the ball, but I just don't see Chicago beating Green Bay this year. The next week should be another great game. This one on November 24th, the Sunday before Thanksgiving. The Green Bay Packers play at home against the San Francisco 49ers. The Packers will look to avenge their loss in the divisional round last year in the playoffs. If it wasn't for a particular kicker, Green Bay might have won that game and they might have gone to the NFC Championship. But we can't dwell on the past too much, as much as it hurts. This game, another one, I think can go either way, especially with it being in Green Bay towards the end of November. It could be cold, it could be beautiful and 70. That's the beautiful part of living in Wisconsin in November. It can be anywhere between 0 degrees and 80 degrees, but we'll see. A game I think could go either way. I am going to give San Francisco the win in this one, which I believe puts Green Bay at 3 losses on the season. And then the next week, the Packers will play on Thanksgiving at I believe it looks like they're playing in the late slot in Green Bay against Miami. Yet another game I think could go either way. Two talented teams. Um, the Packers will be angry after the loss against San Francisco. I think they'll come out hot, especially with Miami coming up to Green Bay at the end of November. At the end of November, excuse me. Same thing with the 49ers. They're in California. It's always warm there. I think it's going to have even more of an effect on the Dolphins, and I am going to give Green Bay the win in this one. The following week, the Green Bay Packers will travel to Detroit for the first game in December, on December 5th. This game, I think Detroit will win. I think the Packers and Lions will split this year again. However, each team will win at home rather than on the road. So I'm going to give Detroit the win there. The Packers then have a long week. They don't play for 10 days after that. So on December 15th, must be a Monday night game possibly, the Green Bay Packers will play in Seattle on December 15th. I am going to give Green Bay the win here just because Seattle isn't who they were in 2014. I still have nightmares about Green Bay in Seattle, but particular 2014 NFC Championship, Brandon Bostic, we all know the story. It hurts, but I am going to give Green Bay the win there. It should be a fun game, but I'm going to give Green Bay the win. The next week, on the eve of Christmas Eve, if you will, on December 23rd, the Green Bay Packers will be at home to take on the New Orleans Saints. And again, just because of the talent, I am going to give Green Bay the win here as well. And every year there's always a game you don't think you should win that you win, and there's a game that you think you should win and you don't. This could end up being one of those games, a trap game, if you will, especially if the Packers do as well as I think they will up until this point. It could be a loss, but on paper, I'm going to give Green Bay the win. The final 2 games are against divisional opponents. On December 29th, the Green Bay Packers will travel to Minnesota to take on the Vikings. late December, but it is a dome. Minnesota does have a nice stadium, but um, that's pretty much all they got going for them this year. I'm going to give Green Bay the win again. And to close out the year on January 5th, the day after my mom's birthday, love you, Mom, Green Bay Packers will play at home against Chicago, and I'm going to give Green Bay the win here. So I think this is a little overconfident. This is probably my ceiling. I think I only have four losses on the year, just based off of the schedule I'm looking at and based on where teams kind of stack up on paper. With losses against, I'm going to count them because I don't quite remember. With losses against Philadelphia, loss against Houston, a loss against San Francisco, and a loss against Detroit. That would put the Packers at 13-4. That's definitely a top two seed in the NFC. That's the ceiling. Now the floor, who knows? They could lose to Indianapolis. They could lose to the Los Angeles Rams. They could lose to both Houston and Jacksonville. The Packers could go to Seattle and just completely stink after having 10 days of rest. I do think the floor for Green Bay is probably around 9-8, maybe, yeah, 9-8, 8-9, somewhere in there around 500, just because of how young this team is. But they do have experience, how talented it is, and especially with new defensive coordinator Jeff Hafley, it sounds like there's a lot of hype around this defense. Which, if the Packers had a top 10 defense this year, would be the first time since 2010 during the Super Bowl run. Um, but yeah, there's just a lot to be excited about in Green Bay. So I'm gonna put the floor at probably 8-9, and the ceiling at 13-4. So if we get close to the average, I think 11-6 is pretty reasonable. Like I said, there's always one game that you think you should win that you don't, and there's a game that you don't think you should win on paper at least, and that you do end up winning. So that game against San Francisco could go either way. Games against Houston and Jacksonville, especially with the one being in Jacksonville. Indianapolis is going to be competitive as long as everyone's healthy. So I would say my expectations would be around 11-6, maybe 10-7. But I could definitely see them going 12-5 or 3-4. And God forbid any major contributors get hurt. I think we're looking at 8-9, 9-8, somewhere around there. So that is where I stand on the Green Bay Packers regular season. I do apologize for not putting out more Green Bay Packers content leading up to this. But the season's only 3 days away. I am very excited. That is all for me for now. Go Pack Go, and I will hope to see you guys soon.